He walked into the restaurant that night fully prepared to fire someone. Instead, he found the most loyal worker he had ever met, and the painful reason that loyalty existed cut deeper than anything he imagined. Richard Halston had built his entire business on instincts, and those instincts told him something was very wrong before he even touched the door handle. Richard always said he could walk into any restaurant he owned and know within 5 minutes whether it was thriving or quietly dying. But standing outside Harvest Lane Bistro in Columbus, Ohio, just minutes before 11 at night, his confidence wavered. The place was not failing yet, but it was slipping. Slow evenings, tense staff, too many complaints about wait times and mistakes that should not have happened. It did not feel like the restaurant he had poured decades of his life into. He pulled the hood of his gray sweatshirt tighter and adjusted the fake beard the production team had insisted he wear. He hated it. It scratched his face and made him look like someone trying far too hard to hide, but comfort was not the goal. Truth was, he was here undercover, like he had been many times before, to find out what reports and numbers never showed. He wanted the real story, not the rehearsed smiles managers gave when they knew he was coming. When Richard stepped inside, the smell of the earlier dinner rush still lingered: roasted garlic, lemon butter. A faint smoky note from one of their signature dishes. The dining room lights were dim, chairs flipped upside down on tables, the silence heavy. Only one bulb over the bar remained on, casting a dull glow like the last breath of a long day. Richard exhaled slowly. "All right," he whispered to himself. "Let us see what is really going on." He moved through the empty dining room and pushed open the swinging door to the kitchen. Stainless steel counters had been wiped down, but not carefully. Not clean enough, like someone had rushed through closing just to escape. Cutting boards leaned against the wall. A half-full container of chopped cilantro sat abandoned on a prep table. Richard noticed everything. Sloppy close, he checked the clipboard hanging by the walk-in freezer. The closing checklist had been signed 3 times earlier in the evening. Everything looked fine. Too fine. In his experience, neat paperwork often meant people were hiding something. He walked deeper into the kitchen and stopped. At first there was nothing, no voices, no carts, no footsteps. Then he heard it. Tap, 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 slow, steady, repeating. It sounded like a knife hitting a cutting board. Richard checked his watch. It was 3 minutes past 11. No one should be here. The manager was supposed to have locked up and left. Tap, 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 careful, controlled, almost quiet on purpose. Richard followed the sound past the dish station, past shelves stacked with dry goods, toward the small prep room in the back corner. "Hello," he called out, keeping his voice neutral. "Anyone here?" No answer. The tapping continued. His hand tightened slightly around the phone in his pocket. He was not afraid, but he was alert. He pushed the prep room door open just enough to see inside. A single overhead light was on. Under it stood a young man, back partially turned, shoulders tight, eyes locked on the vegetables beneath his knife. His movements were fast but quiet, sharp but controlled. He chopped like someone who did not want attention. Richard recognized him instantly. Darius Colton, prep cook, 20, 3 years old, hired 6 months ago. Why was he here this late? Richard stepped fully into the doorway. "Hey," he said calmly, "did not mean to scare you." "You are here pretty late." Darius flinched slightly, then relaxed his shoulders. "Yeah, sorry, just catching up on some things." The knife never stopped moving. Richard studied him. "Mind if I ask what things?" Darius hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Prep work. I do not like leaving too much for the morning crew." The way he said it caught Richard's attention. Not proud, not annoyed, defensive, like the wrong answer might cost him something. Richard forced a small smile beneath the itchy beard. "I am new, training on nights. Name is Mark." Darius glanced at him briefly. His eyes were tired, not normal tired, heavy tired. "Nice to meet you. I am Darius." Richard nodded toward the cutting board. "You always do prep this late." Another pause, small but clear. "Sometimes." Richard did not push, not yet. He leaned against the wall, acting curious instead of suspicious. Something in Darius's voice made Richard stay. A quiet tension like the real story was just beneath the surface. He stepped farther into the room, pretending to look around. The air smelled sharp with onions and cold metal. A small radio sat on the back counter, playing softly. Plastic containers were stacked neatly nearby. Carrot shavings scattered the floor. He had been here for hours. Darius sliced red peppers smoothly, almost mechanically. No wasted motion, no rushing, just repetition. Richard cleared his throat, who usually closes around here. I was not sure where to clock out. Mason usually does, Darius said without looking up. He left earlier. Was not feeling great. That did not match the logs Richard had seen, but he kept his tone casual. You did not head out with him. Darius paused again. I had more to finish. Looks like more than a little, Richard said. Darius moved to celery. His fingers trembled slightly. His eyelids drooped. Richard stepped closer. How long you been here today? Came in around 5. Richard glanced at the clock. You mean 5 this afternoon? Darius nodded. So 12 hours, Richard said quietly. I started early and you are still going, just keeping up. Richard nearly slipped into CEO mode right there. Questions, rules, laws, but he stopped himself. He was marked tonight. Look, man, he said gently, nobody else is here. You do not have to stay for me. If you are tired, you can chill. Darius shook his head. It is fine. It does not look fine. Darius froze for a moment, knife hanging midair. Then he kept cutting. I am good. Richard did not believe that for a second. Dark circles under the eyes, worn shoes, an apron tied twice because the straps were fraying. This was someone running on empty. You live nearby, Richard asked. About 15 minutes. Walk or bus? Bus. You work nights a lot. You like it. Darius let out a short breath. It is quiet. Quiet at 3 in the morning was not peaceful. It was lonely. Before Richard could say more, Darius finally looked up. Why are you here so late? Training, Richard said. Manager said I should learn nights first. Darius watched him carefully, then nodded and returned to chopping. Richard stepped closer to the table. Mind if I help? Help, Darius repeated, eyebrow raised. Yeah, how hard can it be? Darius almost smiled. Ever cut peppers before? Once. Did not go well. Darius handed him a spare knife. Just do not bleed on anything. They worked side by side, uneven rhythm, but the tension eased. You are holding it wrong, Darius said. Show me. Darius adjusted his grip. Gentle, tired. What is keeping you here this late? Richard asked quietly. Darius stiffened. I told you. Richard nodded. Then the hallway made a noise. A scrape across tile. Darius went still. You okay? Richard asked. Yeah. Just whined. There is no wind inside. Darius cut faster. Want me to check? No. Then softer. It is fine. The sound came again, closer. Darius closed his eyes. It is my sister. Richard blinked. Your sister. She is 10. She is in the storage room. Richard felt his chest tighten. Why? Because I could not leave her alone tonight. The weight of that answer filled the room. Can I meet her? Richard asked. She is sleeping. Richard nodded. This explained everything, but it also raised far more questions. And the night was only just beginning. Richard stayed quiet after Darius mentioned his sister. He did not rush to speak. Silence was often where truth felt safest. Darius kept chopping, but his rhythm was off now. Each slice landed harder than before, like he was cutting through more than vegetables. Richard lowered his voice. You sure she is okay back there? Yeah, Darius said, but it sounded uncertain. She gets anxious. I did not want to leave her home alone. I do not usually bring her here. I just did not have a choice tonight. Richard nodded slowly. Must be hard. You do what you got to do. That simple sentence carried more weight than any long explanation. Richard leaned against the counter, watching the young man push through exhaustion like it was normal. You always work this late because of her? Darius did not answer. Richard noticed a small container near the prep station. Cut fruit, grapes, apple slices, bananas, not for the restaurant, food prepared with care for a child. He spoke gently. I am not trying to pry. You do not have to tell me anything. Darius exhaled. There is nothing anyone here can fix. Richard studied the room, the empty kitchen, the hum of the freezer. This was not just where Darius worked. It was where he hid. You look like you have not slept in days. I sleep when I can. Richard believed him. The door behind them made a soft click. Darius stiffened. Panic flickered across his face. Before Richard could speak, the door opened slowly. A small girl peeked inside, curly hair pulled into a loose ponytail. Eyes heavy with sleep. Did you call me? She whispered. No, Lonnie, Darius said gently. Go back to sleep. I am almost done. Her eyes drifted to Richard. He lifted his hand in a small wave. Hi, I am Mark. She stared for a moment, then rested her head against the door frame. I am cold. Darius closed his eyes briefly, then walked her back into the hallway. Richard stayed behind, staring at the cutting board. A 10-year-old sleeping in a restaurant at 3 in the morning. When Darius returned, a dish towel was wrapped around his hand. Blood seeped through. You cut yourself? Richard asked. Just a blister. It was not a blister. You want to take a break. Breaks slow me down. Darius sat on a stool, shoulders slumped. The fight drained out of him. You eat today? Richard asked. Had a sandwich. When? Around noon. You have not eaten in 15 hours. Darius did not argue. Richard filled a container with chicken. Eat? I cannot. That is for tomorrow. This is not a test. Eat. After a moment, Darius did, slowly, carefully. Thanks. Does Lonnie eat? Always. What about you? I get by. Richard felt his chest tighten. Does the school know what is going on? No. Why not? They would call someone, and if they do, they split us up. Richard swallowed. Is that what you are afraid of? It is not fear, it is fact. A loud thud echoed from the hallway. Darius jumped to his feet. They ran to the storage room. Lonnie sat on the floor, knees pulled to her chest. A metal bin lay on its side. Nightmare, she whispered. Darius pulled her into his arms instantly. You are safe. Richard watched from the doorway. Back in the prep room, Lonnie sat on the stool, jacket wrapped tight. She sipped water and glanced at Richard. Why is he still here? He is helping me, Darius said. Richard smiled. I am slow. She smiled back. Darius looked at Richard, worry heavy in his eyes. You said earlier you are one bad week away from everything crashing, Richard said softly. Darius stared at the floor. When my mom got sick, she could not work. Bills piled up. I was 16. No one pays a kid enough to support a family. Richard listened without interrupting. After she passed, people disappeared. Not because they did not care. Life just kept moving. They said they might take Lonnie. Said I was too young. What did you do? I lied. Richard nodded. I left school. Took every job I could. This place is the first kitchen that actually taught me anything. You are good, Richard said. It does not matter. I do not have papers. Talent does not need paper. The world thinks it does. Richard clenched his jaw. You ever think about certification? Costs money and time. I have neither. You should not have to do this alone, Richard said. Who else will? Lonnie tugged his sleeve. Can we go home? Almost. Let me finish, Richard said. He took the knife. Darius watched him chop. You are not failing her, Richard said. You are doing more than most people ever would. Darius's shoulders loosened. Richard wiped the board. Darius, I need to tell you something. Before he could, footsteps echoed across the dining room. Mason entered the kitchen. What is going on here? Richard removed the hood, then the beard. Mason froze. Mr. Halston. Darius went pale. Richard nodded. Yeah. Darius panicked. I did not know. I am sorry. Stop. You do not need to apologize. Mason stepped back. Richard sat in front of Darius. Tonight was about seeing the truth, and what I saw was someone carrying too much. You are not fired. Darius blinked. You are getting a raise, training, certification, child care support. Lonnie looked up. I will not have to sleep here. Never again. You are not alone, Richard said. Darius covered his face, overwhelmed. People do not do this for people like me. People like you are exactly who this company needs. Richard stood. You two go home. Tomorrow we start fixing everything. Lonnie smiled. Pancakes, that sounds perfect. They left together. Richard stood alone in the kitchen, hopeful. Change had already begun. Richard watched the kitchen door swing close behind Darius and Lonnie. The sound was soft, almost gentle, but it echoed louder than anything else that night. The room felt empty in a different way now, not lonely, honest, the kind of quiet that follows truth. He stood there for a long moment, looking at the cutting board still scattered with thin slices of pepper and celery. The mess told a story no report ever could, a story of someone working past exhaustion because stopping was never an option. Richard reached up and rubbed his face where the fake beard had been. He felt older than he had an hour ago. Not tired, changed, Mason stepped back into the prep room slowly, unsure of where to stand. Sir, I did not know. If I had known about the kid. Richard raised a hand gently. I know. You were doing your job the way you were trained to do it. This is not about blame. Mason nodded, relieved but still shaken. What happens now? What should have happened a long time ago, Richard said. We start paying attention. The next morning, Richard was already in his office before the sun came up. He had not slept much, not because he could not, but because his mind would not slow down. Every moment from the night before replayed itself, the tired eyes, the shaking hands, the way Darius stood in front of his sister without thinking. By 8 a.m., HR was in the room. Operations joined 10 minutes later. Legal after that. Richard laid everything out clearly. No anger, no accusations, just facts. We missed this, he said, and that is on us. The room was silent. He continued, Darius Colton is exactly the kind of person we claim to value. Loyal, hardworking, honest, and we let him struggle alone because our systems are not built to see people like him. What do you want to do? One executive asked carefully. Richard did not hesitate. We fix it, starting with him. Then we make sure it never happens again. By noon, the paperwork was ready. A raise that actually mattered. Not a token increase, a real one. Health care coverage effective immediately. Paid certification training. Flexible scheduling that did not punish responsibility. Access to company. Supported child care programs they already had but rarely offered to hourly staff. That afternoon, Darius walked into the office holding Lonnie's hand. He looked like he had barely slept, but his shoulders were lighter, less braced. He stopped when he saw the conference room, the glass walls, the long table, the people waiting inside. Richard stepped forward. You are not in trouble. Darius nodded, still unsure. They sat. Richard spoke plainly, no business language, no corporate distance. You have been surviving, Richard said. That ends today. Darius listened without interrupting, gripping Lonnie's hand. This is your new pay rate, Richard continued. This is your training plan. This is support for her, counseling, after-school care. Transportation help. Darius stared at the papers like they might disappear. Why, he asked quietly, because you earned it, and because we failed you by not seeing you sooner. Lonnie looked up. Does this mean my brother will sleep more? Richard smiled. Yes, that is exactly what it means. Darius let out a shaky breath. I do not know how to thank you. You do not need to. Just keep being who you already are. Weeks passed, then months. The changes were not loud. They were steady. Darius stopped working double shifts. He started attending training twice a week. He learned techniques he had been teaching himself for years. His confidence grew slowly, not dramatically, but solid. Lonnie started after-school programs. She laughed more. She slept through the night. The restaurant changed too. Morale improved. Turnover dropped. Not because of speeches, but because people felt seen. Richard visited often, not undercover this time. Every visit, he watched Darius move through the kitchen with a calm focus, no panic, no rush born from fear, just skill. One night, during a busy service, Richard watched Darius guide a new prep cook through knife technique. Patient, clear, kind. After the rush, Richard pulled him aside. You ever think about leadership? Darius smiled slightly. I am still learning. That is what leaders say. A year later, Darius earned his certification. He framed it and hung it in the small apartment he and Lonnie now shared without worry. The fridge was full. The lights stayed on. Lonnie wrote a school essay once about heroes. She wrote about her brother. Richard read it later. He had to step outside before anyone saw his eyes. Some people drown quietly, he thought, and sometimes all it takes is someone willing to look past rules and see the human standing there. That night had not saved a restaurant. It had revealed its soul, and because of that, everything changed, not just for Darius and Lonnie, but for everyone who would come after them, because sometimes people do not need judgment. They need someone to see them, someone to believe in them, someone to give them a chance they never had. And when that happens, stories do not just change, lives do.